In this exercise, we're going to take a look at using IMVU Studio Toolkit to make a furniture item, a simple static furniture item. So, as always, we need to make sure that we are starting from a clean scene. So, File, New, General. Make sure our objects are deselected. So, select None. This ensures that the toolkit loads correctly, so none. And then we want the toolkit itself, which is View, Sidebar. The shortcut for that is N. There's the sidebar. There's the toolkit tab. Click on that, and we have our tools. So we want Furniture Tool. So click on the heading, expand the options, and then just click on Create Furniture. So what we have are the defaults, or the starter object. So we have a reference cube, and we have the furniture skeleton, which is called root. It's a node called root. So let's make a simple furniture item. So from the Add menu, we want to go into Mesh and just drop in a cube. Mesh, cube. We're going to use our widgets, so move, rotate, scale, universal if we want all three combined for convenience. Let's move that out here so we can see. So hold Control to snap to the grid. Let's go into Edit Mode, Object, Edit Mode. Switch Selection Mode, so to Faces. Click, select, use the Move tool, so we've got the same controls and the same widgets. Hold Control, snap to the grid, and we can make that about the same height. So for smaller increments, Control, Shift, click, drag. Let's go with that. And then let's do a little bit of editing. We'll add some bevels. So switch to Edge Select. Select our 4 edges around the corners. And then the edges around the top. And then what we can do here is use the bevel tool to bevel those edges, or those selected edges. So we get the bevel tool. All we need to do is click drag, and it will bevel that for us. And if we have a 3-button mouse with the mouse wheel, we can scroll up and curve that shape like so. Let go, and that sets it in place. Click on the Move widget to disable or turn this off. So we now have our object. Go back into object mode, and then from the object menu we want Shade Smooth. So Object, Shade Smooth. That will smooth the mesh so it looks like a contiguous object. Makes the curves look more curved. That'll be our simple object. Won't do anything particularly complicated. So next we want to go into Material Properties. Add a material, so we can either click on the plus or click on New. This will create an instance. New will create an instance that's populated, whereas clicking on the plus just creates an instance that is not populated. So click on that. That's our preview. Let's click to rename. Let's just call this stool. Space, square brackets, 0, close square brackets. That's our IMVU compatible material name. So we've got some basic properties, but to finish up with the material, we want to switch to shading workspace. So there's our object, and there's our basic material nodes. And to this we want to go into the Add menu, Texture, Image Texture. So Add, Texture, Image Texture. This drops in an image node. So let's scroll down a little bit. And here we want to create a new image that will fit to our object. So click on New. We get the new image overlay. Click type a title. So let's call this stool. We don't need the numerical append. Width, let's go 512, that's the maximum, and height 256. Generated type, you can change that. So click on the drop down, UV grid, color grid, either or, and then OK. And then we want to connect that to the base material nodes. So click drag color output, base color input, and there is our object assigned the material that we've just created. So we've got to edit some UVs. So for that, UV editing. These are the defaults, so let's just select those. This is the default that's created from the cube when it was originally created, and obviously they've got messed up, so we need to edit those. So that's our object. Let's just frame the scene. View, frame selected. This will frame the scene on the selected object so that it rotates around it. Because right now the rotation's off. And now it isn't. So next, because we want to see what we're doing, so change our display to material preview. There's the material. So let's select all and see what we have. So that's the default UV layout, which is a edited version of the default cube. So for this, what we want to do, because it's an unusual shape in the sense that it's got curves, what we want to do is play around with some seam placement. What this will do is split the mesh into sections. So depending on how we want to unwrap this, the simplest way we could do this, the simplest thing we could do is select this edge loop that runs around the object and detach this top section from the body, and then we can do the same thing for the base to isolate that. So what that will do is create 3 UV map sections, which we'll see in the editor. And for that, what we want to do is, as we're in edge select mode, we can use Alt click. So that's the Alt key, press that and click on this edge or any edge on this loop to select the loop all the way around our object. So let's just go into wireframe to make that easier to see. And that's selected that loop. So that is an edge loop. We want to mark this as a seam so that it splits from the rest of the object. And for that, we want to go into the Edge menu and then Mark Seam. So Edge, Mark Seam. That will highlight that edge and tint it orange. So that's now created a split, or it will split that section from the main body. We need to repeat that for the bottom. So Alt, click, that'll select the bottom, and again, Edge, Mark Seam. And that will split that. So if we try unwrapping this now, so select all, And then from the UV menu, we can either do this in the 3D view, or we can use the UV menu in the editor, in the UV editor. We want unwrap. Just do a basic unwrap. Click, and that will unwrap our object. So if we switch back to material preview, we can see what that's done. The top and the bottom are okay, but the body obviously is stretched because what Blender is trying to do is unwrap this awkward shape. It's basically a cylinder by flattening it out, squashing it. So that means that the top is this tiny area and the bottom is probably the outer border. And what that means is there's now a disparity between the density of those two main areas or main sections. So to fix that, what we have to do is place another seam down one of these edges, and that will cut the UVs so that this can then lay out flat. So select an edge, and then edge menu, mark seam again. So that's marked a seam, so let's just go into wireframe so we can see what we've got. Select none. So that's what we have. We should have something similar to this. So select all. And then from the UV menu again, we just want to unwrap. This time we'll see a difference in the way that this section is unwrapped. So UV, unwrap. And this is what we end up with. So what it's done, as with the top and the bottom, the seam has split the top from the body, the bottom from the body, and it's split the body down the side, which allows it to be laid out flat like this. So now we can do some basic UV editing. So keeping an eye on the image as shown on the object, we want to use our widget tools. So again, move, rotate, scale, universal, that combines all three. What we can do is select a section of the UV. So we can either do that by click dragging a selection box, or we can use the island selection tool. That will allow us to select each of these segments, which are separate islands, and manipulate them. So hold Control, snap to the rotation, and then click drag on the outline. So that's upside down, so let's go back the other way. So that's the right way up. And then we're going to use the widgets just to position these shapes. Scale. Scale them all at the same time so they're all sized or scaled relative to each other. And then click anywhere inside the white loop. So we can go about that far. We can rescale the bottom because that's not seen. Doesn't need to be that big. So we might have to rescale that so we can fit the top in. There's our top. Try and find a space for that. There's the bottom. And that's our basic object. So switch back to layout, which is the default view. That's our object. And what we can do is prep this for export. So before we do, we just need to file, Save as, so we've got to save the file before we actually do anything with the tool, otherwise it won't work. So, file, save as. Let's find our location that we want to save to. Toolkit. Simple stool. Save as. Now there are a couple of things that we need to do to prep this project for export. So first, make sure our object is selected. Go into Object Properties. And here, we just want to rename this to make it easier to see what we're doing. So let's just call this stool.mesh. That just makes it easy to identify in a big project when we're looking at the outliner trying to determine what it is that we're looking at. So, with this being our reference object, it won't be exported. So, we can temporarily hide it. So we can either select the object, Object, Show Hide, Hide Selected. Shortcut key for that is H, and then to unhide it's Alt-H. Or we can just use the outliner. So in the outliner, all we need to do is just click on the little eye icon. That will hide it. So that's step one. Just move that out of the way so that we can see what we're doing. Step two, grab our object, position it relative to the root node. So this is the skeleton for the furniture item. So we're going to hold Control and we can snap that back to 0, like so. And then final prep, all we need to do is move this entry in the outliner into the Furniture Export collection. So we can do this two ways. You can either click, hold and drag, and that drops it into the collection, or with our object selected, Object, Collection, Move to Collection. So Object, Collection, Move to Collection. That's the M key, M for Marty. That will bring up a pop-up which will list the collections. So these correspond to what's in here, in the outliner. So what we need to do, let's just press the M key to bring that up. We need to move our object into Furniture Export. So click on that, and we'll see that this entry, our mesh, will drop itself into the Furniture Export collection. So click, and there it goes. Let's just save over the top of our project, File, Save. So one final thing that we need to do, select our object, switch back to UV editing, and we generated this image, so we need to save it. We need to make it real. So in the image menu, we just want to go down to Save As, or Save. Save As gives us the opportunity to name the file, so stool PNG. Let's just call that Toolkit simple stool. We can change the settings, so compression, or change a different format. So file format, compression. Otherwise, just click Save As Image. And what this does is it converts the generated data into a real image that's then associated with the material. So now we have an actual image mapped to our object, which means that when we import this into Studio, it will be brought in. So back into a layout, and then we can export. So let's just save over that. Save. And to export, all we need to do, click on the export button. Click on that, Toolkit will do its thing, exporting an FBX that we can then import into Studio. So in Studio, create a new project, so create button or the plus button in the top left corner. Browse to our category, so in this case we want rooms and furniture, furniture. We want to use the empty furniture item. Preview on the right will be empty because obviously the furniture item is empty. And all we do is click on Derive. So click on Derive. There's our avatar based on our settings or our account settings. All we need to do next is import the FBX. So import FBX. Browse to the location. Select our file, which will be prepended, an abbreviation of the tool that we were using. So fern for furniture, clothing, accessory, etc. So select the file, open. So that's a preview of what's in the file. Set up FBX. There's our settings. We don't need to worry about the skeleton, so that's okay. We don't need to worry about scale, so those are okay. So for the mesh, we can change this to 0. This is a furniture item that's overriding the default, or whatever would be the default. So in this case, 0. Next. There's our image. Next. No animation review. That's what it's going to be bringing in. And then import. And this should import and automatically assemble. And there it is. Our very simple furniture item. And that is the basics of using the toolkit to make a very simple furniture item and getting that into IMVU Studio. Obviously the next thing to do would be to edit the product info, so icons, product name, your profit, anything else, and then just submitting this to the catalog. But that's the basic process of using the toolkit to make a very simple static furniture item.